for over 20 years. Findhorn has been, according to the Stockholm Institute that our sister was referring, is the lowest ecological footprint ever measured in the Western world. We are half of the UK average. According to the UK Treasury, we will be below the line of poverty. And Findhorn, as many other communities connected to the Global Eco-Village Network, to the Transition Towns movement, they are communities that they're made of people that have been taking their spirituality into action. I myself, I'm also a daughter of a farmer, and I'm really proud of being a daughter of a farmer, but from Brazil. And I grew up having to go every sunrise and every sunset to the field to look at the cows. And at a certain stage, as I grew up, I asked my father, but why do we need to go every morning and every sunset to count the cows and tell what's the... And he said to me, the eye of the farmer fattens his cattle. So it's really important, whatever you put your attention, that will grow. And for many years, being a social change activist in Brazil, I was waking up in the morning and wanting to change society. I was anti-nuclear. First I was anti-dictatorship and then anti-nuclear. And then I was a political feminist that at the stage was anti-man. So I was always putting my eye into that aspect of the society that was dysfunctional. And that's how I would wake up in the morning and activate change. Until I came to the Global North and I realized that there was a shift, and I said, okay, so instead of waking up in the morning and working with what is dysfunctional, or what some of us call at the UN the convergence of multiple crises, the need to understand this convergence of multiple crises, and the same mindset that has created this convergence cannot solve it, I engaged into a real laboratory of sustainability, which was Findhorn, where we are really practicing how is to redesign our social relations. How is it to devise, imagine an economy that distributes wealth within and between generations. How is to diminish our ecological footprint and still have a quality of life. So I wanted to really go to the laboratory to see, is this possible or is this only rhetoric? One of my main teachers at the university was Paulo Freire. He wrote The Pedagogy of Oppress, and Paulo Freire would sit with us in the classroom and say, listen, every time you sound a word, remember, there's two aspects to your word. There's aspect of reflection and there's aspect of action. If you use the word just on the reflection, emphasize only reflection, that word would be more like a rhetoric, like many of our politicians for 20 COPs have been using the word for lots of reflection, but very little action. So we could, let's go there, we should, so that's the rhetoric. But if you use your word and only emphasize action, that action could be without enough reflection. That action is going to be really on the surface of the problems. It's not going to go to the root causes of poverty, the root causes of inequality between Global South and North. So I'm here to represent Gaia Education, which is this consortium of eco-village educators who have been living laboratories of sustainability and really learning from our mistakes. Because I actually have been learning much more with my mistakes than with my successes. That's where we learn more. But we need a safe space of a laboratory to come and start devising new ways and somehow redesign our presence on the planet. So Gaia Education is born out of 23 eco-village educators. We've been meeting for 12 years together, funded by an organization called Gaia Trust from Denmark. And we've been meeting and teaching one another how do we work with invite conflicts address conflicts as an invitation for intimacy. How do we create a community-supported agriculture? How do we create community-owned energy systems? How we redesign our water systems and create our local currencies? So we've been kind of working on all those emerging practices together, and we organized this in a body of living knowledge, and we created Gaia Education 10 years ago. And out of that, we have been taking this experience of eco-village into 41 countries right now. But the most important is not about the institutional education, but what is most important is the transformation that a set of principles that have been tested in reality can make into when it kind of reaches places where they are in the verge of precipitation of transformation. Why I talk about the verge of precipitation of transformations, because right now I think most of us are playing at least those communities and urban and rural villages that we've been working. We see that most of us are playing two roles. We have the role of I would say nurses of a dying system, and also we have the role of midwives of an emerging system. So, and many of us have a foot in one place and a foot another one. And sometimes many of our kind of designers for sustainability, they still have a foot in the old system where they get the payment and things like that, but they really would like to be activating the new, but we are in between the two. And between the two, we talk about one major principle that is called maximizing edges. Maximizing edges is a principle of the permaculture that says, like, when you really want to increase the yield of your system, when you want to bring more diversity into your ecological system, you maximize the edges, because the edges is where the place where there is more richness and diversity. When a tropical forest meets the savanna, for instance, in my home country, Brazil, in that edge, the buffer zone, you have the species of the forest, you have the species of the savanna, and you have the species that are really particular to that buffer zone. So if you maximize the edges in that your system, you're going to have more diversification. So in our design for sustainability and spiritual activist work in the world, we talk about maximizing the edges between being nurses of a dying system and midwives of a new system, because there's still the good, the beautiful, and the truth of the old system. We cannot throw it away. So there is lots of advances that we have made over the last centuries that we should take on, but include and transcend. So I do hope this had made some sense for you. I'm talking basically in summarizing. There is a great interest and purpose in doing what we call the vertical integration between different types of spiritualities that are alive in Findhorn and many of the eco-villages that we work with, but at the same time all this being really embedded into the transformation of our social experiments. And a final thought that we realize that, you know, networks, which I know the network in EBA is one of the co-hosts of this event. Network is one level of a complexity. For networks to continue to survive in transformation into action, we need to turn networks in communities of learning. And when we start learning between one another, we then turn ourselves in zones of influence. And I do hope in our conversation here we can create this field of influence that can even go further and influence the discussions that are taking place in the blue department of Le Bourget. Thank you very much.